On Valentine's Day, John and a popular actress were spotted entering a five-star hotel together. That day, I posted a picture of our divorce certificate on Twitter. We married quietly, but our divorce swept through social media. John thought I embarrassed him and told me to take my things and go. I didn't take anything of his, I only took my cat. But later, he regretted it. He got on his knees and begged for my forgiveness. I shook my head. It was too late. 34 bed, please pay your fees. I was woken up in the middle of the night by a call from the hospital. They said my mom was critically ill and I needed to come immediately. I couldn't catch my breath and rubbed my face hard before heading to the payment counter. I handed over the card, but moments later the nurse returned it. "This card is locked," she said. I was stunned and handed her another one. Still failed. I tried all my cards, all of them failed. It was absurd. It was John. He was punishing me for speaking against Betty. But those were my cards, filled with the money I saved for my mom's medical bills. How could he do this now? People behind me in line started getting impatient. "Can you hurry up? Can I pay later? My mom needs surgery now," I asked the nurse, my voice trembling. "Of course not. Go raise the money now. Without payment, we can't proceed with your mom's surgery." I hesitated before dialing John's number. I called several times, but no one answered. Finally, it went straight to busy signals. I texted him, "Please unlock my cards. My mom needs surgery. It's urgent." A red exclamation mark appeared, he had blocked me. The nurse came to push me again. Desperate and in tears, I called my best friend. "Kathy, can you lend me $10,000? All my cards are frozen, and my mom is in critical condition." Kathy, though initially sleepy, woke up immediately. "Don't cry. I'll come over right now. I'll first transfer you $5,000 and then gather the rest." Her $5,000 quickly came through. I paid the critical amount to get my mom into the surgery room. Waiting alone outside, I couldn't help but clasp my hands together. The walls outside the operation room were filled with the most devout prayers. Staring at the lit red light above the door, I couldn't stop shaking from sheer cold fear. I suddenly thought, if it were me in there, if I died tonight, would there be anyone to even claim my body? My phone buzzed frantically. Popular actress seen with a mystery man at midnight, deeply affectionate at the airport. Even though the figure was blurry, I recognized it immediately. It was John. John had always been low-key, not one to show affection publicly, yet here he was, affectionately hugging Betty. The man in the photo was kissing the young woman tightly held in his arms. How sweet. No wonder he didn't answer my calls. I suddenly felt weak, almost slipping off my chair. While my mom fought for her life, John had frozen my cards to punish me. I had to beg for money, while he spent the night with his lover. My nails dug into my palms, turning my knuckles white. Suddenly, a disheveled figure rushed in. It was Kathy. "Where's John?" she asked. I showed her my phone. Holy crap, Kathy couldn't help but curse. I grabbed her hand, tears finally falling uncontrollably. The surgery room light turned green. I instinctively held Kathy's hand and hurried over. "Doctor, how is my mom?" The doctor looked at me and shook his head. "Say your final goodbye. If we had started earlier, there might have been a chance." My legs gave way, and I collapsed, Kathy quickly supporting me. My mom was still warm, but the heart monitor showed a flat line. My mind went blank, and tears streamed down uncontrollably. If only John hadn't frozen my cards. If only he hadn't punished me for his lover. Why did I love him? Why did I fall for someone like him? Grace, you sacrificed your mom's life for your love. Are you satisfied now? I bit my cheek, trying but failing to stop, sobbing painfully. "John, I will never forgive you." With Kathy's help, I arranged my mother's funeral. After burying her ashes, Kathy asked, "What will you do now?" "Get a divorce." Kathy hesitated but then nodded. If you need a place to stay, come to mine. I'll find a place, I smiled at her. After all, I had been preparing for this day. The media frenzy continued to grow. Everyone speculated about who Betty's mystery man was. Betty's Facebook hinted at romance. Tabloids exploded with news. I uninstalled Facebook. I didn't want to see any more filth. Not that I'd be John's wife for much longer, anyway. After handling my mother's affairs, it was a week later when I returned to what I once called home. I pushed open the door, feeling a dreadful chill. Clothes were scattered everywhere from the entrance. John couldn't even wait to bring her home. The bedroom door was ajar, and the noises inside made me nauseous. While my mom died, John met Betty at the airport while I managed the funeral. They were entangled in what used to be our bed. Stunned, I sat on the couch. The silent suffocation of the past 2 years was unbearable. After Betty returned, he started staying out late. He opened an entertainment company for her, clearing every obstacle, lavishing resources. He treated her like a treasure, even kissing her so tenderly. Now, he brought her home. Countless times did I see lipstick marks on his collar, hickeys on his neck, the scent of unfamiliar perfumes. Sitting quietly in the dark, I turned into a statue of despair. On the coffee table lay the divorce agreement I had brought. I told myself, some things must end. I don't know how long I sat in the dark before the bedroom door opened. John came out, shirtless, to get a drink of water. The scratch marks on his body were glaringly obvious. He spotted me sitting in the living room and sneered. Back to beg for mercy? I stared at him silently. My mom died. I saw John pause while drinking his water that night. You cut off my card. I couldn't get the money in time to save her. I didn't get to finish before John interrupted me. He let out a mocking laugh. Without my money, she would have died long ago. How could he say something so heartless? I was shaking with anger. I grabbed the ashtray from the table and threw it at him with all my strength. But John didn't dodge. The ashtray hit his forehead, and blood started flowing down his cheek. I froze. He frowned at me. Have you gone mad? At that moment, a woman's scream rang out. John, why are you bleeding? Betty came rushing down from upstairs, wrapped in a towel, with visible marks all over her neck and chest. They really had no shame. We need to talk. Tell your little lover to leave. I was trembling so much with anger that I could barely speak. John didn't even look at me. Betty's appearance quickly grabbed all his attention. Why are you barefoot? Go back upstairs. No way. Betty clung to John's arm, pouting. I don't want you talking to that wild woman. She's disgusting. I'm not going anywhere. You make her leave. John hugged her, didn't even glance my way, and gently soothed her. Don't worry, if anyone's leaving, it's her. Who do I love? Of course it's you. I bit down hard on my lip to stop myself from crying in front of him. No way. I couldn't cry in front of them. I barely had any dignity left. I didn't want to look even worse. Betty gave me a challenging look, then glanced at the divorce papers on the table. I could swear I saw a flash of joy on her face in that moment. John, she cooed, pointing at the table, look at that. John followed her indication, looked visibly startled, and then frowned like he had seen something filthy. What does this mean? They had been treating me like I was invisible the whole time, only now did they finally spare me a glance. I forced my shaking body to calm down. John, my mom is dead. So what if she's dead? Betty muttered under her breath. A surge of bitterness choked me, and I couldn't hold back my voice. Anna Marie, it's all because of you. Why did you cut off my card? The doctor said she might still be alive if she'd been treated sooner. Who told you to bully Betty? John said it lightly, as if it was just a minor lesson for me. The absurdity was overwhelming. What did he take me for? Was he trying to train a dog? Ms. Grace, you look quite pathetic, Betty said nonchalantly. Blaming others for your mom's death, you're such a bad person. Besides, Hasn't John been paying your mom's medical bills all along? With an innocent expression, she said, you're just like the farmer and the snake. John paid so much for your mom, and now that she's dead, you use her death to morally blackmail him. You have such a scary conscience. I was shaking all over with anger. Betty, aren't you afraid of retribution? John didn't even look at me. Cut the lousy act. Do you think using your mom as an excuse will stop me from divorcing you? A wave of insult washed over me, making me shiver from head to toe. I could not believe these cruel words were coming from John. We're getting divorced. I stared at him intensely, tasting blood in my mouth from biting my cheek. I hadn't even noticed the pain. Maybe he didn't expect me to bring it up again. John's face finally turned sour. Are you sure? I'm sure. I stared at him without backing down. John picked up the papers and looked them over, surprised. You're leaving with nothing? Betty was also taken aback and peeked over his shoulder. I don't want anything, just a divorce. John's face twisted in anger as he picked up the pen I'd prepared and signed his name. Then he threw the papers in my face, full of disdain. Take your stuff and get out. The sharp edge of the A4 paper cut my face. I silently picked up the papers and headed for the door. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, at the Civil Affairs Bureau. The response was the heavy slam of the door. Betty was John's first love. But John's grandmother hated her and firmly forbade her from entering the family. I saved his grandmother by chance, and she forced John to marry me. Grandma ruled the family. To inherit the company, John grudgingly agreed. He always thought I was scheming, figuring I'd use some trick to win over his grandmother and marry him just for the money. He believed I planned to have a child to secure my position. It was like he thought I was committing a crime. But I had loved him for 14 years. Have you ever met someone so stunning during your school days that you couldn't settle for anyone else afterwards? That was John for me. He was my senior. John's mother was a famous beauty, and his father was a scholar. He inherited their best traits, earning a PhD in economics from Oxford in his early 20s. To drab old me, he seemed like a god. I had prayed sincerely. If only my deity could love me. On our wedding night, I was so nervous I felt like a taut bow, but John gripped my chin, looking at me with utter disgust. No matter what dirty tricks you used, I will never love you. Then he pushed me away and spent the night in the study. I once thought my love could move him, but later realized it was just self-humiliation. He despised my touch. Our first time together was from my calculated seduction. Through the intense pain, I heard him call out, Grace. I was so happy. The first few years, even though he was cold to me, he never had anyone else around. I thought that as long as we had enough time, we could make it work. Until once after we got married, I accidentally overheard him on the phone. He was calling someone so tenderly. Betty. I felt that familiar dull pain starting to rise again in my heart. The next early morning, I was waiting outside the marriage bureau. The blazing sun made me feel dizzy. But even until noon, John still hadn't shown up. I called him. After ringing for a long time, he finally picked up. John's voice was full of condescending mockery. Having second thoughts? I'm asking when you'll be here, I answered calmly. I've been waiting all morning. John abruptly cut off whatever he was about to say. After a long pause, he sneered. Wait. The call ended. To him, me asking for a divorce was probably like a pet dog biting back at its owner, a blow to his pride. I sighed and started messaging someone from a smaller account. John doesn't want a divorce. Could you talk to him? The other person replied with a question mark, then quickly retracted it. It's okay. I knew she saw it. A year ago, I started getting photos from an anonymous Facebook account. Seeing the shirts, ties, cufflinks, or other intimate items I had chosen for him appear in those photos made me feel dirty. Now that I'm ready to leave him, I don't need to endure anymore. First loves really have an allure. Less than half an hour after I sent the message, John showed up at the marriage bureau with a dark expression. Honestly, I don't understand. He's the one in love with someone else. He's the one who cheated. I've already stepped aside. What's he so angry about? With the agreement in hand, no kids, no property disputes, and both clear intentions, the divorce procedure went smoothly. Except for John staring at me the whole time. When I got the divorce papers, I exhaled deeply. Leaving me makes you happy? John's voice sounded unhappy. I gave him a puzzled look. I can finally start my own life, not as your accessory, and I won't bother you anymore. Isn't that good? While we were together, his friends never respected me. To them, I was just some gold digger who'd be kicked out sooner or later. John and I were married for 7 years. At one point, I really thought I had touched him. I was afraid of thunder. He would rush home to comfort and hug me during storms. In the home theater, sitting in his lap, feeding him popcorn, unable to resist kissing him, he gradually opened up to me. I once thought we had a future together. Until Betty returned. Then I realized, everything with him was a lie. I left as quietly as I came. All I took was my cat. Coco is a white long-haired cat with mismatched eyes. Sadly, she's deaf due to genetic factors. I found her on a rainy night and took her home. John's mother's first reaction was, "Stray cats are dirty. How can a woman trying to conceive keep a cat? Aren't you afraid of deformities?" But she was so small, she'd definitely die if thrown out. I begged for a long time, even alerting John's grandmother, and barely kept Coco. John's mother threatened me, "Once you're pregnant, this cat has to go." I held Coco, gently stroking her soft fur. Well, now both of us are being thrown out. Coco couldn't understand human speech. She just quietly watched me and licked my face. That's when I realized I was crying. I took one last look at the wardrobe full of seasonal clothes and jewelry and walked out. The maid eyed my wrists and neck nervously, clearly wanting to check if I had stolen any jewelry. Even the servants showed me disrespect. John and I didn't make love often, and afterward, they'd check the trash like I was an animal. The maid was John's mother's person, watching every aspect of my life, reporting anything suspicious. I felt disgusted and threw those things away myself. But John's mother would send me those awful medicinal soups. John never touched me. How was I supposed to conceive? Looking back, our marriage was just a bad fate. I accidentally saved John's grandmother, and with her pushing, I married John. Before the wedding, she told me, "Grace, John's just got a clumsy mouth. You'll know once you get to know him." I do know now. He's scum. After moving into the rented place, Coco quickly adapted to her new home, surveyed her territory, then lay down to groom herself. Watching her carefree, I started worrying about my living expenses. After paying hospital bills and rent, I only had a 4-figure amount left. If I didn't find a job soon, I wouldn't survive. It's funny. After staying with John for so long, I was still broke. He was always generous in buying things, even having brand managers bring seasonal items for me to choose from. I had all the jewelry and accessories I needed but no money. John always thought I married him for his money. I couldn't argue. My mom was critically ill, and the ICU costs were astronomical. I couldn't afford it. At first, John paid for it. But once Betty came back, the payments stopped. I shamelessly asked for help, but John's mother brushed me off with one sentence. "We're struggling too." Her newly bought 7-figure jade bracelet glowed softly as she spoke. I could only afford to move Mom to a cheaper nursing home and start figuring out how to make money myself. I knew John's mom didn't think much of me. She looked down on my humble background, believing I couldn't support John, but she couldn't go against John's grandma at all. Now that John was settled in his career, Betty was back. With better options than me, why would she tolerate my presence? John and I both graduated from a university. Although there were a few blank years, I'd been freelancing online during that time. But I hadn't anticipated how hard finding a job would be. My resume had gone from major companies to small firms. After the 20th rejection, even Kathy noticed something was wrong. "Is someone sabotaging you?" Who else could it be but John? With just a flick of his finger, he could leave me gasping for air. Today was no different. The company that had notified me of an interview yesterday apologized when I arrived. Sorry, we've already found a suitable candidate. It had started to rain outside, and I hadn't brought an umbrella. Hesitating for a moment and thinking of my meager savings, I decided to brave the rain and head to the subway station, but as I was going down the stairs, someone suddenly bumped into me, and my high heels slipped, causing me to tumble down. I landed heavily. Documents scattered everywhere, my phone flew far away, sharp pain shot through my knee and elbow. Lifting my hand, I saw large abrasions already oozing blood. The worst part was my skirt. I'd worn a suit for the interview, now it was torn up to my thigh, leaving me immobile. Isn't this Miss Grace? How did you end up like this? Betty's voice chimed in, fake surprise laced with malice. Rain hit my face and body as I looked up wretchedly, seeing John standing next to Betty, lips pressed. Did he just let Betty push me? Shameless. John's airy voice hit me like a slap in the face. Sorry. A stranger appeared perfectly on cue, extending a hand. I accidentally bumped into you. Are you okay? But seeing Betty's smug face, I knew this so-called passerby was no coincidence. My white shirt clung to me, turning semi-transparent from the rain. I pushed the man away, instinctively covered my chest, and tried to stand up, only to be crippled by the pain in my ankle. Grace? A somewhat familiar voice called in surprise. I looked back, bewildered, recognizing a vaguely familiar face. Seeing my confusion, he smiled. Long time no see, I'm Joe. Then I remembered, he was a junior 2 years behind me. We'd co-hosted a college event once, but now I was a mess. Embarrassment washed over me as I looked down. Suddenly, warmth enveloped me as Joe draped his jacket over me. The warmth made me shiver. Grace, let me take you home. I blinked, tears falling despite myself. Whoever it was, as long as they could take me away from this embarrassing scene. Why is Joe here? John's voice tinged with hidden anger. Only now did Joe seem to notice the two others standing there, looking up quizzically. Well, looks like there's 2 more people breathing. John's lips pressed downwards, a sign of his displeasure. Came to play hero, I see. Joe laughed cheekily, extending his hand to me. Grace, need a ride to the hospital? From an angle John couldn't see, Joe winked at me, whispering, let's go, make him mad. I barely managed to suppress a smile, placing my hand in his. Excuse me. I heard Joe say softly. Suddenly, I was lifted off the ground, Joe carrying me horizontally. John's face finally darkened completely. Grace. The loud squeal of a rubber chicken was his reply. Joe fished out a rubber chicken from who knows where and squeezed it several times, then mockingly set out the window, no clue why the dog's barking. He stepped on the gas and sped off. Grace, are you okay? Joe drove single-handedly with practiced ease, ever the gentleman by not looking my way. I'm fine. I shook my head. You can drop me at the subway station up ahead. Joe looked shocked. Grace, is my car not good enough for you? Why are you in such a hurry to get off? At least let me take you to the hospital to treat your wounds. Looking at the golden prancing horse logo on his steering wheel, I belatedly remembered rumors about his well-off background in school. Drenched, I sat on his leather seat, fidgeting. What if I ruined his seats? I couldn't afford to pay for them. No need for the trouble. But Joe cut me off. My mom always taught me that girls are precious and should be well taken care of. Your mom must be a very gentle person. I mused sincerely. Of course, Joe grinned, and then magically produced a bouquet of daisies, for you. The white flowers cradled in my arms conveniently hid my disheveled front. I was grateful for his discreet thoughtfulness. After tending to my wounds, the doctor said my ankle was badly sprained and I needed a week in the hospital. I couldn't afford a hospital stay, so I hurriedly declined, insisting on recovering at home. Who's going to take care of you? Joe frowned. My best friend will. I felt very embarrassed. I've already troubled you enough today, plus I need to get home to feed my cat. You have a cat? Joe's eyes lit up like an excited puppy. Yes, a white one. Mentioning Coco, I couldn't help but smile. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. I couldn't refuse his enthusiasm and agreed. The neighborhood I lived in was quite old, with poor lighting at night. Joe's driving skills were unexpectedly good. Even in a place like this, he drove smoothly and effortlessly. As we rounded a corner, I vaguely saw a flashing red light. But before I could make it out, Joe's car had already passed it. Once we got inside, Coco, who was normally very aloof, circled Joe's legs, wagging her fluffy tail and meowing sweetly. I was stunned. Coco usually disliked everyone but me. This was the first time she showed friendliness to anyone. What kind of magic cat is this? Joe was over the moon, hugging Coco and showering her with kisses. Even when he was about to leave, he was reluctant. Grace, can I come to see Coco again? Seeing Coco clinging to his pants, almost wanting to climb onto him, I was a little jealous of my own cat. Of course. As he was about to leave, Joe hesitated for a long time. Grace, do you want to come work at my company? I was taken aback, and then shame washed over me. He saw through me. No, Joe waved his hands frantically. Grace, don't get me wrong. I've been watching you for a long time. I looked at him in shock. What was he talking about? Joe fumbled around for a while before finally sighing in defeat, looking like he was about to face the firing squad. Grace, first of all, I'm not a stalker. He continued awkwardly, I'm a fan of your novels. He nervously fiddled with his fingers before finally taking out his phone and showing it to me. The familiar and cute kitty avatar appeared. Wasn't this my fan? The chat record of our conversation from last night was still there. I love your new story. I'll try to get my dad to invest in making it into a movie. Wait for me. I had always thought he was a 16-year-old rich girl who needed to go to school every day. Because he was only online after 9 p.m. every night. I stared at him, puzzled. Dad? His face was so red it seemed like it could bleed. Finally, he gave up in exasperation. It's me, okay. After I heard you were looking for work, I wanted to ask you to join my company as a screenwriter. My dad gave me an entertainment company. He said if I can't make something of it, I shouldn't even think about taking over. You have no idea how awful some of those scripts are. The gap between being an author and a screenwriter seemed vast. I was stunned. You don't have to. But his expression was very serious. Grace, I want to hire you not out of pity, but because you deserve it. Come to my company. I can offer you a better platform. I was going to consider it, but that night, a message from my landlord urging rent payment quickly made me give up any hesitation. If I kept holding back either Coco or I would end up suffering. Better to swallow my pride than starve. Joe was ecstatic to hear my decision. Really? Take good care of yourself. Come work as soon as you're better. That night, I received a call from John. Found a new gig already? Followed by several photos of Joe dropping me off at home. His voice laced with sarcasm. Grace, you're as low as ever, huh? Always spreading your legs for any man with money and influence. My teeth clenched, and the humiliation hit me like a slap in the face. 7 years together. This is how John saw me. John, did you call just to insult me? He paused, then laughed maliciously. Yes. John, the biggest regret of my life is marrying you. I immediately blocked his number. A former classmate who I only hosted a competition with still came through in a time of need, but my ex-husband only cared about who I was with. It just so happened that day was Valentine's Day. I posted a picture of my divorce certificate. Twitter exploded. I'd never seen my Twitter so lively before. Countless messages poured in asking if it was true, when did I marry John, and why did I divorce him? In the eyes of those so-called upper-class people, whether it was Betty or me, there was no difference. We were nothing but commodities. That night, a topic about a certain actress suspected of climbing through the ranks became a hot search topic. But it didn't even survive until the next morning before being quietly removed. Another topic suddenly shot to the top. Characteristics of actresses who married into wealthy families. At the top of the list was Betty. He really did everything for Betty. After taking a week off, I started working at Joe's company. Joe didn't deceive me. He recently bought an entertainment company and genuinely needed reliable screenwriters. I quickly adapted to the role. I genuinely enjoyed writing. Now I could see my scenes come to life on set. There's nothing more joyful for an author than that. But Joe started coming around quite often. At first, he would formally call me Grace, but later it just turned into Grace with no formality. The screenwriting team he hired was very young, which meant they were pretty carefree. Whenever Joe visited, he brought lots of fresh fruit. As time passed, it seemed the team got used to his treats. When Joe arrived, someone would fake a cough. Just getting some fresh air. And then a group would link arms and leave under the pretense of going to the bathroom. At first, I didn't really notice. I was well aware of my own feelings. I'm a divorced woman, just relying on my junior's care. Would I still be foolish enough to hope for anything else? We're not living in a fairy tale. I know I'm not the main character. After 7 years with John, I understand well I was never the main character, just a side character in someone else's love story. So, when Joe showed his interest, I mostly avoided him. When I couldn't, I pretended not to understand. Young guys can't hide their feelings. His eyes sparkled, wanting to give you everything. After all, he's a young rich guy. Why would he need to come to the set every day? I later found out that Joe's family background was as good as John's, if not better. His family fled abroad during a war decades ago and kept their wealth. No wonder John only dared to boast but never make a move. I appreciated Joe's kindness, but the only way to repay him was to write good scripts and make money for the greedy capitalist boss. For a long time, our relationship was like Coco's owner and Coco's good friend. After repeatedly hitting a wall, Joe probably understood my thoughts. He stopped being so eager to be around me. I felt relieved. There are so many young and beautiful girls. He just liked the author temporarily. I shouldn't hold him back. He deserves better. That night, the mysterious texts didn't come. But Betty and John kept trending. The latest news said they might be getting married soon. Paparazzi caught them holding hands on a street in Zurich. John must be single now. They aren't hiding their relationship anymore. I saw a radiant pink diamond ring on Betty's hand. Seeing that ring, it felt like something squeezed my heart. When that ring went on auction, John was coincidentally in Zurich. Back then, we were still on good terms, and he asked what I wanted. I pointed to the ring in the catalog. But he didn't bring it back, only saying he didn't win it. I was disappointed, thinking he was just busy. Looking back, I realized it was because I wasn't worth it. I looked at the photo, and tears started to fall despite my laughter. Thinking back on the years with John sometimes feels like a nightmare. We were on completely different paths. It was a mistake to cross paths. At least now, I've woken up from the dream. Joe's contract terms are pretty loose. Besides his company's projects, I can take on other work as long as there's no conflict. I really love turning words into reality. It's a unique kind of joy. Until I ran into Betty on set. I was trying to avoid her and John. But surprisingly, after we started filming, she kicked out the original leading actress and took over the role. On her first day, Betty had people distribute afternoon tea all over the set and warmly greeted everyone. She seemed kind and gentle. It didn't show that she'd cornered me in a room like scolding a stray dog. Life doesn't seem too good for you after leaving John. She looked around the hotel room, seeing my instant noodles and black coffee from working overnight, filled with scorn. Haven't I heard you're clinging to Joe? Is this how he treats you? I couldn't bother responding, focusing on typing away. I had several deadlines. Who had time for her nonsense? My silence only seemed to encourage Betty, making her more arrogant. Joe's family will never let you in. Stop dreaming of being Cinderella. Finishing the last word, I saved my work and finally looked at her. Not everyone moves up by relying on men like you do. Betty seemed shocked I'd challenge her directly, standing there stunned. I found it laughable. I had stepped back for John because I loved him. But now Betty dared to flaunt in front of me. Who did she think she was? I don't care if John adores you, we're divorced. If you want to be Mrs. John's wife, be my guest. I just want to be a good scriptwriter. The pink diamond on her raised finger sparkled, but her face was as gray as a 3-day-old corpse. John really was willing to spoil her. Now I understood the power of capital. He had never treated me so specially. After joining the crew, Betty first complained about the character's unlikable persona and then about the storyline not being catchy enough. Her so-called top-notch screenwriter messed up the original script. That was one thing, but her writer tried bossing everyone around. When she wanted to turn the naive girl character into a powerful heroine again, I couldn't bear it anymore. You can't change the plot like this, it ruins the original core. Betty turned the character into a pure romance trope, with every man in love with the heroine. Betty stayed silent, but her assistant jumped in to defend her, spitting insults. Betty can carry an entire show on her own. Who do you think you are? But I tried to reason, but no one listened. Everyone around just watched the drama unfold. Between a famous actress and an unknown writer, it was obvious whose side they'd take. Director. Betty smiled gently at the director. I'd like Grace, the writer, to rehearse with me. The director, already biased, was eager to agree when Betty wanted to make peace. Grace, rehearse with Betty. But why would a writer need to do acting rehearsals? The director didn't even look at me. If you don't want to rehearse, then don't write the script either. I suddenly remembered. Betty came with some backing. The person behind her is John. Everyone knew Betty was here to teach me a lesson, but what could they do about it? This industry always trampled the lowly and elevated the high-ups. Betty designated a scene where the female lead slaps the second lead in the rain. It's winter now. Betty had someone turn the faucet on full blast. I was soaked, couldn't even open my eyes from the pouring water, and the icy cold made my bones ache. But Betty, who said she'd act alongside me, stood outside wearing a coat, gently directing, yes, make the rain heavier, it's not enough yet. Emotions haven't hit the mark. More rain. This rain drenched me for a full half hour, and I was wobbling on the brink of hypothermia. Betty then signaled to stop the water, walked over gracefully, and slapped me hard across the face. I was stunned from the rain, but her slap snapped me back to my senses. Betty sneered in a voice only the two of us could hear. I've never liked you. Who do you think you are? You got lucky entering the Jiang family. Still think you can hold on to the title of Mrs. John? Look at yourself, do you think you deserve it? I wiped the blood from the corner of my mouth and retorted coolly. Paying for those rumors about your upcoming wedding must have cost you a lot, huh? But why haven't I seen John marry you yet, even after we've been divorced for so long? Doesn't he want to? Betty's face turned livid. Bitch. She raised her hand high, about to hit me again, and I instinctively closed my eyes. But the expected pain didn't come. I cautiously opened one eye and saw that Betty's hand was being held by someone, and she was screaming from the pain. Joe's face was ironclad. I had never seen him so angry before. Stop. Betty's face turned white with pain, and she shrieked, let go. Let go of me. It hurts. John's voice interrupted, seething with anger. Let her go. I realized then that John had arrived without me noticing. The man I once loved deeply, if it had been before, such a sight would have torn my heart apart. But now, I was amazed to find I felt nothing. Work is indeed the best way to break any spell. Stripped of my affection-filtered lens, he was just an ordinary man. Betty's face contorted in pain. Her assistant looked like a barking chihuahua, comical but too afraid to intervene. Everyone around recognized them, but no one dared to step in. Joe looked at John and sneered. John, your taste in people is as bad as your taste in scripts. He let go of Betty, tossing her aside like a dead dog, and she immediately started whimpering and hid behind John. Oddly enough, John ignored her. He just stared at me, protected by Joe. Grace, come over here. The warmth started to return, and my face hurt to the point of numbness, probably swelling. I covered my face and shrank further behind Joe. Joe glanced back at me, and I could see the barely hidden amusement in the corners of his mouth. Don't be afraid. He took my hand and led me away. Grace, come back here. John shouted, gritting his teeth behind me. I asked Joe. Isn't it weird? Do you hear a dog barking somewhere? Joe couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, it's springtime. Once we were out of sight of those two, Joe stopped and started a serious lecture. Next time you encounter something like this, run immediately, got it? I'll always protect you. I appreciated his good intentions, but I couldn't live forever under someone else's shield. One mistake was enough. Betty used the pretext of rehearsal. Don't worry, she wouldn't really tear into me. I am the writer, she's the actress. Public scrutiny weighs more heavily on her. Joe's face was still grim, like an angry Doberman staring at me. I sent you to work as a writer, not to be bullied. But dealing with crap is part of being a corporate drone. I patted him. It's just some flesh wounds. Besides, I secretly recorded everything with my phone. If she dares to come at me again, I have leverage. Betty was in too much of a rush earlier. I loitered around setting up the phone. Her usual gentle first love persona would crumble disastrously if she tries to bully me again. Joe pondered for a while, then, like an aloof Afghan hound, smirked at me. He then pulled out his phone and made a call right in front of me. Toss both the dumbass director and actress out of the crew, I'll find my own people. Joe then made a second call. Buy the rights to that youth campus drama, we'll shoot it ourselves. Can he really do that? Betty left the crew the very next day with her so-called top-notch writer and team, then started insinuating on Facebook about bullying on set. She even posted a video, looking pure and innocent. I had a well-crafted script and wanted to bring everyone a unique story. Apparently, the crew had different priorities. I initially wanted to discuss things with the writer, but was misunderstood as inserting myself into the role. So, I decided to withdraw from the project. Please don't spread this further. This was a big deal. Betty making it clear she was forced out. Her fans couldn't accept it and furiously attacked the crew online. Joe wouldn't miss a chance to diss Betty. He swiftly reorganized the crew, assigned new roles, hired new actors, and settled everything efficiently. Then he posted a notice about replacing the lead actor on Facebook. His speed was remarkable, giving no chance for Betty or John to save face. Betty, who usually worked in big screen projects, had reluctantly joined this crew. Her fans were already dissatisfied. Now with such a major upheaval, it was on the brink of exploding. So Joe personally joined the crew. Super cocky. After everything that happened, I gritted my teeth, determined to polish a great script. Every day, I was losing hair in clumps from stress. The campus drama Joe took over midway did surprisingly well. When it aired, the first episode immediately got over 1 million views. The lead actors were all newcomers, but that fresh feeling perfectly matched the drama. As it aired, the hype only grew. Joe was willing to spend money, had connections, and the show itself was good. It turned a low-budget drama into an S-tier hit. The night the show ended, our entire team, plus Joe, watched the screen nervously. The rating soared to 40 million views. Everyone erupted in cheers. The champagne tower, prepared in advance, was rolled out, and Joe generously declared, "Drink up. Tonight, go all out. I've booked the bar downstairs and the infinity pool on the rooftop for you all." Everyone laughed. Joe was a generous boss. People praised him while jokingly forcing him to drink. At a young company, once everyone drinks, they start letting loose. We started with the King's game. But Joe had terrible luck today. And the co-workers were relentless. Number 4, kiss the first person of the opposite sex to your left. Joe's face darkened as he revealed his card. The first person to his left was me. The co-workers roared in excitement. Joe surrendered and drank 3 glasses instead. Next round. Number 8, do push-ups on number 3. Number 8 was him, 3 was me. Joe, looking serious, flipped his card and downed 3 more glasses. Finally, he couldn't take it. Let's play something else. During a break, I went to the restroom and overheard 2 female co-workers worrying while touching up their makeup. I feel bad for the boss. When will Grace notice his feelings? No idea. If we can't help him tonight, we're out of options. I hesitated a long time in the bathroom before heading back to the room. When I returned, they had switched to whack-a-mole. It was simple. 5 strings of different colors, a cup in the middle with dice. Roll the dice and cover the matching string. It tested reflexes. But everyone was a bit tipsy, reactions were slower than usual. I couldn't hold my liquor and kept losing. After a few drinks, I started feeling dizzy. When they tricked me again, before I could grab my glass, a hand took it first. Joe sat upright and blocked me. I'll drink for her. No need, I tried to push away, but he pulled me back. He whispered in my ear, stop it. His breath against my ear made me shiver. Then I felt his shoulder shaking slightly. Was he laughing? Co-workers, stunned for a moment, began coughing out loud in mockery. I'm going to play something else. I need to use the restroom too. What weird things are you going to do in the restroom? I was so dizzy, instinctively tried to pull my hand back but couldn't move. A while later, he asked softly. Drunk? Wanna get some fresh air upstairs? I nodded weakly, almost stumbling as I stood. Still want to go? Joe's voice sounded worried. I nodded firmly. The infinity pool was beautiful. Probably drunk out of my mind, I insisted on cooling off in the pool. Joe, left with no choice, found me a swimsuit and kept urging. Wait, I'll change and be right back. Annoyed, I pushed his face away. Joe, helpless, left, looking back constantly. The alcohol probably made my craving stronger. Seeing the inviting blue water, I couldn't resist and jumped in with a splash. The pool water was warm. After soaking for a while, I noticed a large float nearby. Remembering those photos on Facebook of people floating in infinity pools. With effort, I climbed on. The pool's waves gently pushed the float towards the edge. Floating happily, occasionally kicking the water. Suddenly, an almost terrified voice rang out, Grace. Don't move. I looked up, dazed, to see Joe frantically splashing towards me. Could he not swim? As the float drifted back, Joe desperately shouted. Grab my hand. Alcohol fogging my mind, I hesitated but eventually extended my hand. Joe yanked me off the float. Before I reacted, the float drifted over the last wave and fell off the rooftop. Reality hit me slowly. The infinity pool had no safety barriers. Didn't I tell you to stay still? For the first time, Joe yelled at me. Then I noticed, he was trembling all over. He clung to me, his face pale as a sheet. You scared me to death. His voice trembled with a hint of tears. Only then did the overwhelming fear wash over me, making me weak-kneed, relying on Joe for support. If I had stayed on that float, I'd be dead now. Wait. I frantically patted his arm. The float fell. Will it hit someone? Go check. Joe looked even paler than me. We supported each other shakily as we approached the edge of the pool to check below. About 5 meters down, there was a platform where the floating mat had landed. Thank goodness nobody was hurt. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. As the fear subsided, I noticed the awkwardness of our current position. The young man's body radiated a heat that made me feel hot all over. Joe clung to me tightly, as if holding on to the most precious thing in the world. Let go of me, I said. But Joe looked up, and to my shock, he was crying. Before I had time to react, he lowered his head, grabbed the back of my head, and kissed me passionately. "Grace, can you please consider me?" It all happened so suddenly, I was completely stunned. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The door was violently kicked open, and an angry figure stormed in. John rushed forward and kicked Joe into the pool. Water splashed all over my head and face, and I was scared stiff. My chin was then firmly grasped and lifted up to meet John's bloodshot eyes. He stared at me with a rage that felt almost tangible. "What are you two doing?" he demanded. Why was he here? Behind him was Betty, her face smug with satisfaction. "Let go of me." John's grip was strong, making my jaw ache. I struggled to pry his fingers apart but couldn't. Betty was acting coquettish and whiny. "John, she's using Joe to kick me out of the crew." See, I was right. With a shrill scream from Betty, John was suddenly punched hard from the side, knocking him over and shattering a nearby beach chair. "You call yourself a man, hitting a woman?" Joe climbed out of the pool, furious, standing protectively in front of me. John sat up on the ground, wiped the blood from his mouth, and glared darkly. Betty stumbled toward him. "John, are you okay?" "Get lost." John snapped, pushing her away as he lunged at Joe again. The two of them began brawling violently by the poolside. The sound was like two heavy machines crashing into each other, breaking tables and chairs everywhere. Amid the chaos, there seemed to be a flash of light somewhere. Betty, still acting dramatic, screamed, "Stop fighting." Finally, I couldn't endure it anymore. I quietly stood up, approached Betty from behind, and kicked her hard in the lower back, sending her splashing into the water. Seeing her struggle and blow bubbles was just so satisfying. My flying kick left Joe and John dumbfounded. Joe still held on to John's collar, and both men stared at me in shock. "Let's go." Joe happily followed me, his face bruised and battered. Betty continued to flail and scream in the pool. "John, save me." "Grace." John took a few steps toward me. "I need to talk to you." But with Betty screaming for help behind him, he hesitated for a long moment before turning back to save her. "Wait for me." I didn't wait. This kind of thing had happened too many times before. This time, I felt completely free. Joe followed me. As we left, I saw him subtly flip a middle finger behind him. Since Joe got hurt because of me, I couldn't just walk away. But he refused to go to the hospital, saying that he couldn't be absent from the upcoming award event as the boss. Then he turned to me with a pitiful look, begging to be taken care of. Yeah, that's right, he and John had a fight, and he ended up with a fractured arm. After much thought, I decided to cook for him. But I never imagined that the next day, when I opened the door, I would see Joe gleefully waving at me from across the hall. "Hi. Grace, Grace, look at me. Look at me." When had he rented the place across from me? I turned around and closed the door silently, letting him scratch frantically outside. "Grace, why won't you let me in? Grace. Grace." I couldn't handle this kind of life anymore. People in the neighborhood group chat were complaining. Someone frequently parked in other spots and littered with cigarette butts. It was infuriating. I got a call from John's grandmother. "Grace, it's been so long since you visited me." Hearing her kind and gentle voice, I almost burst into tears. Mom's memory came flooding back, but I held back my tears and managed to smile. "I'll come see you tonight." Since my divorce, this was my first time back at John's house. Grandma had been waiting early in the living room and lit up when she saw me. "Grace, come let Grandma have a look at you." She examined me carefully and then frowned. "Why have you lost weight?" I didn't want to upset an elderly woman who had always been kind to me, so I simply smiled. "I've been very busy lately." "Even if you're busy, you need to eat well." John's grandmother looked concerned. "I'll talk to John." "Grandma, John and I are divorced." I sighed. She froze, then let out a long sigh. "Grace, it's my son's fault for mistreating you, Can't you reconsider? I shook my head at the respectful elderly lady. From the night my mom died and John cut off my credit cards, there was no going back. Today I'm here to return something. I solemnly took out a box containing the bracelet that John's grandmother had given me at our wedding. But she shook her head, her frail but warm hand held mine. What I gave you belongs to you. Before she could finish speaking, we heard Mary greeting someone outside. You're back. I instinctively turned and saw John and his mother coming in. John's mother was holding Betty's hand warmly. Mom, we're back, John said, looking startled the moment he saw me. What's there to panic about? He was the one who cheated first. He was the one who had feelings for someone else. And now he's pretending to be innocent? Betty was wearing a white coat today with a brown scarf. She looked gentle and demure, just the type elders love. Mom, this is... John's mother beamed as she led Betty over, but as soon as John's grandmother saw her, her face darkened. Why did you bring her here? Betty's smile froze on her face. I only invited Grace today. Why are you bringing just anyone home? But John interrupted his grandmother. Grandma, she's my guest. Grandma was so angry she started trembling and raised her cane to hit John. You think you've grown up and I can't control you anymore? I went out of my way to invite someone back for you, and you treat them like this to spite me? John just stood there, not dodging or avoiding, taking the hit from the cane. We got divorced. For some reason, I could hear a hint of defiance in John's voice. Grandma, I'll be leaving now. Grace. I heard Grandma call my name from behind. I stopped and turned around, seeing tears in Grandma's eyes. You will always be Grandma's good granddaughter. It's John who doesn't have a connection with you. Come visit Grandma when you have time. This will always be your home. Betty didn't even get a chance to speak, standing there like a backdrop, looking extremely unhappy. John's gaze fell on the box I had put down and he froze. Then he grabbed my hand and aggressively dragged me out. Come outside, I have something to say to you. Betty's face turned pale. John. Shut up. John snapped back ruthlessly. She probably never experienced such humiliation before, and tears welled up in her eyes. But this was my daily life during the 7 years I was married to John. I didn't feel refreshed by it, only sad. Let go of me. I forcibly pulled my wrist away, but John held on tightly. Have you had enough? He looked a bit frantic. We are divorced. I had to remind him. Do you know what that bracelet means? John kept losing his composure tonight. I felt he might be sick. I don't know and I don't care. That's a sign of my wife. John stared at me intensely. Just come back. He was always proud. This might be the first time he begged someone. But I just found it funny. Why do you think I'd care about that? I approached John step by step for the first time. Even I didn't realize there were tears in my eyes. I once loved you so much, John, but you destroyed everything. I repeated what I said to Grandma earlier. From the night you caused my mom's death, we were done. He opened his mouth, as if wanting to explain something, but in the end, he just issued an ultimatum as usual. I will make you come back willingly. It had started raining outside without me noticing. I didn't expect to see Joe at the old house's entrance. Seeing me come out, he immediately got out of the car, hurriedly took off his scarf and wrapped it around me, then covered my head with an umbrella. Why did you come out wearing so little? Are you cold? I was stunned. What are you doing here? Long story. Joe was dodging the question. Are you planning to chat with me here? He looked around the old house with some disdain. So tacky. Did you actually let him come to pick you up? John had also followed us out at some point, holding an umbrella. Of course, I didn't delude myself into thinking it was for me. Sure enough. Grace, you shameless woman. Do you think this is a place for that? Shameless? That's you, I retorted, cheating in marriage, abusing power. Do you think you're noble? Fine, fine. He was so angry he laughed. So now you have someone backing you up. Does he know how you crawled into my bed to seduce me? John. I couldn't stand it any longer and slapped him hard. Do you even listen to yourself? John covered his face, looking utterly incredulous. You hit me for another man? I regret being blind back then, willing to marry you. Let's go. I told Joe the last sentence. Get us out of here. Joe happily complied, helping me lift my skirt as he opened the car door, and then he sped off. I thought I would cry, but there was someone next to me happily humming When the Devils Come to Town. It was impossible to cry. Halfway through the drive, I suddenly looked at him and noticed he was skillfully steering with his right arm. Where's your cast and bandages? After a long pause, he nervously said, Can you just pretend you didn't see it? You need to move out from across the street. Ever since my screenplay got nominated for the Golden Lily Award for Best Screenplay, Betty's fans had been going crazy when I won Best Screenplay and my lead actress won Best Actress. While Betty lost again, they were absolutely livid. As the culprit named by Betty, my entire family history was dug up by her fans. A well-known reporter then revealed secrets behind the Best Screenplay Award, new and old lovers fighting for her, not hesitating to brawl. The accompanying photos were of John and Joe fighting that night. Soon enough, people identified the two men in the picture. Aren't those John and her current boss Joe? This woman knows what she's doing. Her first show was a hit. Her new flame invested heavily in marketing. Didn't Betty get kicked off the set? He not only discredited my talent but also dismissed my efforts, even suggesting I won through bribery. I wondered how much Betty paid him. If this accusation stuck, I'd be blacklisted from the industry. But did Betty really think I wouldn't reveal our divorce to the public? I directly responded, Are you suggesting the competition's judging panel was unfair? Do you know that spreading false rumors can lead to a lawsuit if it's shared over 500 times? Finally, I called out Betty directly. Miss Betty, there were only 4 of us on the rooftop that night. How did you manage to sneak into our company's exclusive building and bring John up to attack our boss? John and I at least have a divorce certificate. But you, an unmarried celebrity, were involved with my ex-husband multiple times during my marriage. After our divorce, you brought someone to beat my boss under the pretext of catching an affair, causing me to lose my job. Betty didn't dare to respond, standing there pretending to be dead. The internet had probably never seen such a confrontational writer, and everyone joined in to watch. Betty, the first love of the entertainment circle. Not only did she entangle with someone during John's marriage, but even her burner account used to DM me got exposed. Of course, I wouldn't miss this chance. I reposted it on Facebook. The divorce screenshot resurfaced on public social media, stirring up the entire platform. My DMs were blown up. Countless Betty fans bombarded me with crazy insults. They called me a slut and a shameless bitch. They even went after my mom. The hateful words rained down, and even though I thought I was strong enough, I still felt suffocated. I had experienced cyberbullying before, but this time, I felt a deep sense of helplessness. John called me then. He asked me, Do you regret it? He used an unfamiliar number. I shot back, Do you regret it? He seemed confident. I can handle the online backlash, he said. Grace, come back. I can forgive everything you've done. I hung up the phone right away. I've always been used to being alone. I never expected so many people to speak up for me. Celebrities I worked with before and the writing teams I collaborated with. Celebrities cared about their public image, but writers were different. Their writing was sharper than knives. They mocked and ridiculed, leaving Betty's fans utterly defeated. Betty had posted a fake, tearful defense video, which got thousands of shares in an hour, with the comments section filled with curses. She got so scared that she disabled comments. Whenever Betty had negative news before, John would handle it for her. But this time, for some reason, John stayed silent. He even started sending me flowers every day, like he was crazy. I didn't get it. What was he aiming for? A sympathy act? The strangest part was that I began receiving scripts that I normally would never get offered. The pay was ridiculously high, and all I had to do was nod to get my name on them. Finally fed up, I called John and asked, "What do you want?" He replied, "Whatever Joe can give you, I can give you too." His voice was deep on the other end. "Grace, can you give me a chance to explain?" His sentence was cut off when my phone suddenly died. There were reports of Betty going to John's corporate headquarters but not even getting to see him. Betty was stunned. She always relied on her clout to pressure others, but now she faced backlash and had to negotiate with John. The director was over the moon from all the generated buzz. I was pleased too, knowing my PR efforts paid off. Finally, I gave them a big gift, a lawsuit. I gathered evidence and sued Betty for defamation. The lawsuit was minor, the major goal was to ruin her reputation. Betty's agency was going crazy with worry during this time. Joe frequently mooched meals and eventually tricked me into cooking at his house. I knew his intentions weren't pure, but I didn't reject him. That night, I finally managed to escape from Joe's sticky attempts, only to find a dark figure at my door, making me scream. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Joe rushed over with a baseball bat. It was John. He didn't know how long he'd been there, looking disheveled. "Grace, are you living with him?" "Yes." Joe answered quickly. I glanced at him but didn't deny it. John's face turned even more ashen. "I need to talk to you." I looked at him, knowing this needed resolution. Joe looked like he wanted to bite someone. "If you want to talk, leave the door open," I said. John hesitated as he entered, seeing a lot of things in pairs, his eyes dimmed. "You too?" He started, but I interrupted. "Are you pleading for Betty? If so, there's no need to talk. She's done so many bad things, she deserves it." "No," John said, shaking his head with a bit of embarrassment. "Grace, please give me another chance. I don't want the divorce." I was stunned. Joe, who was still outside, was also stunned. The door was open. I occasionally saw Joe pretending to pass by, with his ears pricked up, ready to burst in. John hesitated for a long time. I always thought I loved Betty, but after the divorce, I realized I was just obsessed with her. He continued painfully, "I later understood that I didn't take you to events because I didn't want others to see your beauty. I was cold to you in front of my friends because I was afraid they'd know I had feelings for you." With that, he pounded his chest as if in agony. "Those days and nights we spent together, I miss holding you while watching movies. I miss every moment we spent. I wake up from nightmares every day. I can't accept anyone else by your side. I regret it, Grace. I can break it off with Betty right now. Can you come back to me?" But I just looked at him quietly. John seemed to sense something, a bit of panic in his expression. "Anything else? Do you have anything else to say? On our wedding night, you told me to get lost. I made you your favorite dishes with so much effort. You went to the airport to pick up Betty. John, I've never asked much of you, just that ring. And you gave it to Betty. Now you want me back, John. You never saw me as someone deserving of respect, did you?" I laughed and almost cried, for the 7 years wasted. "Our biggest problem was you." Before I could finish, John just straight up knelt in front of me. "I'm sorry, that night I didn't expect my mom would suddenly need emergency care. Betty took my phone and said it was your ploy. I finally couldn't stand it anymore. John. You locked the card. At least be a man and stop blaming women for everything. You disgust me. Grace. It's too late, unless my mom comes back to life, I can never forgive you." Looking at the man I once deeply loved, I realized he could no longer stir any emotions in me. I once thought he was a deity from the heavens. Now it seems he's just a lowly, arrogant man. Without John's protection, all the dirt on Betty got exposed. Drinking, drug abuse, reckless driving, promiscuity. Sleeping with older men for money. It was enough to ruin her completely. Finally, Betty realized John had truly given up on her. She dropped the innocent act on Facebook and went crazy. She released a series of evidence. If I'm going down, we go down together. I finally understood why John was so obsessed with Betty, always catering to her. He committed manslaughter while drunk driving abroad, and Betty took the fall for him. This wasn't some first love, but rather two criminals protecting each other. Till the end, he never told the truth. Under extreme public scrutiny, John and Betty both ended up in jail. Two scumbags. Not a bad ending, right? After leaving the court, Joe asked me. This little dog said nothing but wagged its tail gleefully, as if waiting for praise. I beckoned him with my finger puzzled, he lowered his head, and I seized the chance to kiss him on the lips. I couldn't help but laugh. Joe was stunned for a moment, then his eyes sparkled as he pounced on me, wagging his tail. You finally said yes. I hugged him back, unable to hide my smile. The bird of my youth had finally returned to its destined home.